Before giving the floor to David, our moderator, I would kindly ask you to take your seat. In the upcoming days, you will be receiving an email because we would like to establish the network which we spoke about. So those who don't want to be kept in this mailing list is kindly requested to send an email back by saying, I don't want to be in the loop. Thank you. You will be provided even with all the presentation with a link, and the videos as well, with a link to our cloud in the upcoming days, and then we will share for sure even the report with you for your awareness and as a next step for this brand new network. So, David, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a great day yesterday and even a better evening yesterday. So thanks for coming back. I think the first measure of success is those who come back for the last morning and don't disappear. I think we have quite so many people here in the room. So on what did we do? Let's just a wrap up of what we did in these last days. So we met on Tuesday. On Tuesday we ran through a series of presentations where we got the flavor of what the topic is about and what some of the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities are presented by the experts in the field. We then moved on yesterday and we conducted the SWOT analysis divided in groups, and every group has come up with a slide with its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and every group has a speaker. So what I will do now in a second, I will give the floor so that every group will have time to present. Please try to keep the presentation within 20 minutes. After this presentation, after the 4 presentations, we will have a coffee break. So no questions and answers immediately during the presentations. We will have a coffee break. In the coffee break, while you are having coffee, myself, Stefano, the director, will get together and try to summarize the outcomes, which then I will present after the coffee break, and then we will have a question and answer session where we can talk, we can clarify some issues, we can add some points and take away some points that maybe are not so relevant. What is very important is from our side, we will summarize the outcomes and we will send them to ACT, like we said, to NATO Allied Command Transformation. But obviously not all the points we will discuss today will be of relevance for ACT, because ACT has a very strict remit. So don't be surprised if we come up with a very, very large number of outcomes, but we will actually be presenting a very short amount of outcomes to ACT. It's because they have a specific remit, so it's useless to involve them with things which are not competent for. But enough from my side. I'm sure you're not here to listen to my voice, although I have a very nice voice, but I don't think you're not listening to my voice. And I would like to give the floor to the first group, to the speaker from the first group. Without pushing. I don't think she's here yet. I don't see her. But okay, but then what we can do, we can start with a second group. So the speaker for the second group, please. Stefano, can you put the slide on the second group? Thank you. And please, for the records, can you please introduce yourself before you start? Thanks. Yes, of course. Of course.
So, just a question.
For the technicians, the videos on the stage do not work. Sì, ma qua. Okay, devo controllo.
So, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning from my side. My name is Hannes Schramm. I'm the cultural property protection expert for the Principality of Liechtenstein, and I'm also a cultural property protection expert in a military way for the Austrian Armed Forces. So, after a very democratic process, I was decided to be the presenter for today. So the decision was 8-1, so okay, quite clear. When I say we during the presentation, I mean all the organizations which are involved and which are responsible for NATO stability policing tasks now when I'm going to present the 4 points of the SWOT analysis. The aim of that all is to have a desire for a strong CPP role of stability policing in NATO-led operations, and the task was to analyze it. So we said, what's the strengths of all these organizations which are involved in stability policing in NATO-led operations? First of all, and it's quite important in my opinion, is the methodology. So actually we all use processes and procedures, and we have structures. So we have a legal common ground, that's the first thing. We have procedures like an intel cycle or intelligence preparation of the battlefield. We have decision-making processes. We have STANACs. We have a targeting process, and this is all quite transparent. Second thing is the variety of capabilities and assets, resources, which we have. We have personnel. We are able, as a NATO force, to enlarge personal capabilities from one moment to the other. We have knowledge, enough knowledge to go on the ground. We have experience out of lessons learned and lessons identified processes. We have tools, we have material. Next point, networks, liaison. It's all about information, it's clear, and if we talk about information, it's also about influence. So when we are just enhancing our intelligence networks, liaison networks, when we are creating our situational picture with a very strong socio-political point of view, this is some kind of special compared to the normal military situational pictures. And what we also do in this way is we are on the ground, we have in contact with population, the society, and also with authorities. The second, another point is we have special, let's say it's characteristics. So it's not here, the characteristics? Oh, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm going with the next one. Cooperation, advising, competence transfer. It's quite important because we are in contact, as I already said, with the society, with specialists, with authorities. And what we are doing, and this is our product, we are advising best practices for society which maybe is in need of something like that. Yeah, and we also have something like diversity and flexibility, which is actually the characteristics. So we are the first, or one of the first, in early recovery operations, and we are there for a long time. We are flexible, we are reactive, and we are proactive. So we have different points, different ways of proceeding. We own competence in this way, and we are able to do a specialization on points we need to focus on. From strengths coming to weaknesses. One of the weaknesses is by sure the military nature of that all. We are also with the strength. We have a hierarchy. We have national policies. We are going there, and everybody of us knows that this have to do something approach. So we have to go somewhere, and somehow we have to leave our footprint. So. This is the problem. Also in the military nature, we have this low appreciation of such topics because it's a fine topic we have to deal with. But if you are recommending to staffs and to commanders, you always see this little smile on the face and the thought, okay, not again this winning hearts and minds perspective, but actually it's like that, and this is important. But there is still a neglecting of such a priority and such a necessity to have it in structures and in the task. We have a lack of or limited competence. We have a lack of capabilities and awareness in cultural property protection. So sometimes that's the problem, that we miss the expertise in the field, and we also miss to get the real cultural property meaning, and we need to know that to be able to react on that and to work on that. Then we have the lack of inclusion of different stakeholders in the drafting guidelines, which is more or less connected to the point before, especially in higher levels. So that's a problem, that we have many experts in our area, but maybe not the right experts, just to tackle the one thing at the one point of the operation. So we have to be aware of that. Additionally, we have an inability to cultivate good perception. As we are going into the operation, as we are following procedures, sometimes we miss points and important, in German you say Gelegenheiten, opportunities, chances to intervene or to go into deeper. Yeah, and what we also have is this weakness of internationality versus localization. So we are going into this operation with different cultures and want to influence a special culture, and that we have to be aware of, and this awareness is sometimes missing. Coming to the opportunities, the local involvement and relations. It's a perfect, a perfect opportunity, and it gives us the chance to be involved or just to organize projects and show the worth of cultural property also for the society as well as for our operation. Another one is the information gathering and sharing, and that's always very important to convince commanders, in my opinion, to mention that, because we have the information direct from the field. We are in contact with the local cultural clusters, which are the ones which matter, which are the ones which are directly influencing our soldiers on the ground, and so therefore it's also the opportunity to have a good force protection point of view here. Another point is make NATO and make the NATO forces as a reference point and create something like a light tower. Let's say light tower or a platform where the different providers and the different specialists who have some kind of the interest in this area come together and create policies. Yes, we have a contribution to sustainable operational mission success, that's clear. Winning hearts and minds, as old as this sentence is, it's quite important and it's always counting. And we can also use it for society building, so to bring an operation to the end. This is quite important to go out of the operation again, that we know the society is able to survive and has some kind of property which they can rely on. Additionally, we have the continuous learning process. This lessons learned, lessons identifies a process that they are quite important. They show also progress, or we show progress, or we can show progress. We can try to open the minds of our soldiers and our leading structures, and especially we can, with this continuous learning process, we can aim to do the right things. And at the end, what we also have here is the diplomacy and keeping channels open, the possibility to have them on the tactical, on the operational, and on the strategic ground, to go somewhere on a neutral ground. In many cases, not always, that's clear, but in many cases where we can have a topic to talk about again when other things go down, let's say it like that. What are the threats we identified? It's the external perception, which can get negative and especially also unwanted, which is not always negative, and some kind of missing loss of legitimacy when we don't care about the topic. So the other threat is the abuse of authority and mismanagement. So as we all know, power sometimes corrupts, and it's very easy then to do unwise decisions and which have a long-term effect, but which we are not able to be aware from the beginning. Another point, laws and regulations. If we have a lack of it, if they are conflicting, if they are inadequate, I somehow see. Oh, thank you very much. The points anymore. So if laws and rules and regulations are not accepted, so we have a problem there, if emotion gets stronger as rules. Then we have a changing environment. So this is related to security environment, to the political environment, social economical environment, yeah, and also of the common opinion. What is perceived as cultural property protection? That can change and switch very fast. Another threat is the information gap, the lack of information, the possibility of manipulating information, and the misinformation when we do the assessments wrong. Yeah. Wrong assessments and auto-reference, I was already said that. That's when our perception of ourselves is something else that we show. That also can happen in operation, and is also a big threat because it then comes together with the negative perception of us. And in the end, as we know that and when we go into the topic of cultural property protection, the field opens quite fast. So this task of caring about cultural property protection can blur very fast because suddenly you have responsibilities you were not aware of before, and suddenly you need resources which you were not aware before. So this is very important to have borders and clear rules there. Okay, so that was my point. Actually, I thought, okay, we had another slide with the outcomes, but maybe this comes later. Let's see. So this concludes my briefing. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much. Take your seat. Thank you for your very comprehensive presentation. So now let's revert back to the slide related to group number 1. And please, the speaker for group number 1, the floor is yours. You must have had an excellent moderator because I see the slide is really perfect.
Okay, good morning everyone. Apologies for being a few minutes late. We have it right here. Awesome. Okay, so obviously there will be some, good morning. I'm Costanza Musu, University of Ottawa. So I'll offer you a bit of an overview of what we discuss in group number 1. So there will be unavoidably some overlap, which is, I suppose, part of the exercise. So in strengths, we identify the ability of SP to offer flexibility in the tools and in the need of the population. So the idea here is that in stability policing, you can use the proper tool at the time when it is needed. So this kind of ability of producing, for example, more kind of civilian tools, but also, let's say, escalating and offering a more kinetic, more hard security and military-based tool. It's also an advantage. But then we noted also that the advantage is that we have a military capability, but coupled with the policing mindset and expertise. So the policing mindset offers an advantage because instead of being exclusively concerned with the, let's say, quote unquote, defeat of the enemy, relates itself to the local population in a different way, has different priorities, but also offers a competitive advantage in the type of expertise. And here we thought of, for example, intelligence capability as one of those specific tools and expertise. Another strength, obviously, is the fact itself that there is an awareness of cultural property protection, and therefore it's one identified as one of the priority, although obviously the fact that it is not specifically present then in the doctrine is something that we in stability policy as a specific task. You will see it in weaknesses. So you have, on the one hand, you do have this awareness. On the other hand, we still need to transform that into a specific task. Another strength is the opportunity to offer international cooperation on the area, and also the fact that, and I believe this came out already in the previous brief, the fact that obviously NATO often is the first responder. And so the fact that this particular awareness is embedded in a way already in the force that then happens to be the first one on the ground offers a competitive advantage and a strength. One other strength that we highlighted is the modeling behavior. So the modeling behavior, I would say, we discussed that is a different level. One is the fact that the stability policing can offer opportunity of training, advising, and mentoring, but also the behavior itself, the fact that it is something that is considered of importance, can model behavior, and highlight the importance of the issue itself. The opportunity of having another pillar of civil-military interaction embedded in the operation, obviously, and as a topic of importance. And then, and I think this kind of relates back to the military capability with policing mindset and expertise, the dedicated technology was highlighted. So the ability of stability policing to offer dedicated technology in the form of databases, in the form of technical access, etc., is an edge. Now, the weaknesses. We talk about lack of benchmarking, and by that we mean mostly how do we measure success? How do we, that will come out in other points, how do we benchmark what needs to be done? Then we talk about social gap. So the social gap is essentially a kind of mismatch between the, let's say, the intention of the task and the acceptance of the same by the local population. So this creates an inherent weakness in the mission. A lack of recognized counterparts. What we mean by that is that if you have individuals in SP who look for their own counterpart in a local police force, for example, often there isn't one. You'll have interlocutors that might be museum curators, archaeologists, or other members of civil society, let's say, but not a specific counterpart that would cover the same function. So that can create, again, a bit of a mismatch between, the SP and the other side. A lack of trust and awareness of stakeholder. Again, these are all facets of the same problem, and it kind of also then become a lack of data, information exchange, which means essentially, for example, how much information does SP have on, for example, local archaeology, local sites of points of weaknesses. Yes, there is some, but it's the one that is maybe most known. How much access do we have to more kind of granular understanding of the territory, granular understanding of points of weaknesses? And is that information available but not shared? For example, that can be a problem. If there is that information, but because of the lack of trust, it is not voluntarily shared. Another point was the rules of engagement. Big question here, obviously. The basis of the mission, obviously, from a legal standpoint, are the rules of engagement. What can you do and when, under what circumstances? So if the rules of engagement do not provide, for example, for the ability to actively, for example, use force to protect cultural heritage, then you could be present in an area where you want to protect cultural heritage, but not actually be actively able, unless you are obviously shot at, to carry out that particular aspect of the mission. So how do we address that point? This was a big question. How do we address that point of the rules of engagement so that this is included? And obviously this would create a lot of tension, a lot of different, I would say, understanding of how this is important, whether the use of force should be applied in this particular area. And this kind of also, of course, relates to the legal framework in general of the mission. The previously highlighted point of cultural property protection not being included as an SP task. So this is something that obviously needs to be addressed, because otherwise it's difficult to create and then all the other points to allow for action. We then talk a little bit about definitions and especially agreed upon definition. Do we have an agreed upon definition of what is cultural property protection? How do we define it? And related to that, as a kind of other side of the coin to that, the lack of a shared definition of cultural property itself. Are we talking about cultural property? So we highlighted this word property versus heritage. Are they the same thing? They're not the same thing. Well, if we're talking about heritage, how do we define heritage? How do we differentiate between tangible and intangible heritage? And that really, of course, ties back with then how do we define cultural property protection, right? It's different if you are protecting tangible or intangible, etc. So definition is not just an academic exercise, but it has very, very immediate policy applications. Lack of shared definition, lack of expertise is the other phase of the existing awareness. Yes, there is awareness, but how diffuse is this? And I think we've heard of this in the past couple of days. How big is the expertise in the member states, and how much specialized individuals are there then deployed that actually have a deep understanding of all this, which of course then also create a problem of resources, right? If there are only one or two people who know, then how can you use those people? Are you overstretching those individuals? And then in the weakness, we discuss also the problem, and that kind of recurs then in the opportunities and the threats as well in different forms of the socio-economic development of the host nation. Okay, so when we talk about cultural property protection, sometimes we want to offer that cultural property protection, but we go against the fact that in economies that are rather fragile, sometimes exploitation of cultural heritage is part of the macroeconomy, subsistence economy, looting, etc. This creates a bit of a paradox in the relationship between CPP and the local population, where you are offering CPP for the benefit of the local population, but then you're offering measures that actually counter their immediate needs. How do I feed my family? So this obviously is a weakness, because you're offering something and it's not clear that is wanted in that sense. Opportunities, spreading that cultural property protection, specialization, so making it something that is better shared among the allies and then also with the local population. Rethinking security. This goes into the wider notion of redefining what the mission does and how do we understand the promotion of security. So beyond the immediate task of, decreasing or de-escalating violence, then what is a permanent understanding of security and how does cultural property protection fits into that? So all those pieces of human security, collective identity, etc. So as we think about what is the function of cultural property protection, we start rethinking about what we understand as, I would say, mission accomplished. Is it really about just defeating insurgency or defeating a local group or an enemy army, or is it about what comes forward? So we rethink about security in that sense. Strategic communication, obviously, it's an opportunity of, I would say, nuancing the message and offering a different view or a more multifaceted view of what a mission is doing through the communication. We have an opportunity for increasing awareness of the trained forces. Again, I think everyone here was dealt with these issues, and I think it came out on multiple occasions. You know, why should we care? Why is it important? How do we get people to care and to train? It's hard to imagine training troops to fully understand that when there are so many other priorities. And this also then relates with the same type of priorities, but vis-à-vis the local population. Laying foundation for a sustainable economy. This ties back with the weakness issue. You know, how do we, you know, it's an opportunity to communicate or to try and discuss with local population a more sustainable in-time model of economy that is not the kind of looting economy or local kind of day-to-day survival, but something that goes a little bit forward in time. It facilitates, it's one of the elements, it's not maybe the central one, but it is one element of facilitating eventual NATO disengagement, because it's one piece of the puzzle. It's an opportunity to investigating criminal networks, which of course has beneficial spillover effect on understanding the local dynamics, and then a broader issue of organized crime / terrorism. We can open a conversation on the overlap, but maybe that's for another day. And it's a tool of social reconciliation. Now, the social reconciliation, we bleed directly into the threat, obviously, because one is a facet of the other. Local sectarian, ethnic, political division are a threat to cultural property protection, right? This is obviously, this is where the reconciliation piece enters. One other issue that we discussed is the blurring of the boundaries between local population and the perpetrators. So again, if a stability policing mission is about, let's say, making a function of local police, but also then building those relationships, etc. But then you have CPP as a task, and your target in CPP is not, an army or a combatant, but is someone who's entirely overlapping with civil society, with the local population, then this creates a bit of an embedded problem in the CPP mission. And here we have two different levels of political use of cultural property. So we have competing political use of cultural property protection. So you might have different actors on the ground who offer different views of cultural property protection and might step in. So if SP doesn't start initiatives, they might be taken over by other actors. We mentioned China rather than Russia, and other local, interveners, let's say, other actors. So this then can have implications in terms of political implications. And on the other hand, one of the threats, we talk about the political use of cultural property. So how different actors use cultural property to, as a political tool. This, of course, ties back with sectarian and ethnic and political tension. And then there is another kind of sub-issue here, the tactical use of cultural property. What kind of challenge does it pose when we offer protection of cultural property, and then because of that, then you might have, for example, local groups that use or hide behind cultural property because they know that it's a target that is protected, and so you kind of have a situation where you need to carry out operation, but you would have to target cultural property. You can't, so you kind of create a bit of a weakness. Prioritization in the NATO mission. Long agenda, many things to do. many challenges. Where does cultural property fit? Does it end up at the bottom of the list and then in the end off the list altogether? So how does that affect CPP? And related to that, financial impact. The financial impact is obviously of concern to all the mission. Do you stretch the resources too thin? Do you have to move money from one task to another one in order to do CPP? Would it be then considered not a high enough priority for that? So the financial impact is a problem. I think we don't see it on this slide, but we actually, in the opportunities, we had another element that doesn't appear here, which was the availability in opportunities, the availability of funding from other organizations. We discussed that. So the fact that there are other organizations that do have, their availability of external specialized stakeholders. So there are funds that are not held by SP and that might be available to CPP, not to use directly, but to kind of use in synergy. But on the side of the threats, the financial impact is a problem. And then what we define, and I close with this, the lack of local ownership, right? So this is on many levels. What do you have lack of ownership of cultural property protection during a mission? Can you then also project it into the future when you have that NATO desire, NATO disengagement? How does that carry forward in the future? But during the mission itself, how much is that done as an external part of the mission, and how much is actually then owned locally? And I'll wrap up with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Costanza. So, group number 3, please.
Mask off, glasses on. I think after 2 years we get used to this. All right, so our group started with thinking about, by the way, I'm Kate Melody Berman. I'm affiliated with the Ronin Institute. I'm a research scholar in criminology. And so our group started with thinking about what NATO SP in particular could offer in comparison to its competitors. And the primary strength identified involves NATO SP's capability to perform CPP at multiple points. So first in ongoing conflicts, second during crisis and security management, as well as during the institutional reformation process. And this is due to the police and military nature of the SP component forces. Contributing to NATO's strength in this area are the economic and financial resources that can be devoted to CPP, as well as adequate tools for implementation. Additionally, the capability to couple SP with socioeconomic reconstruction benefits host nations. Similarly, the interoperability among SPUs connected to Article 5 are beneficial for CPP. And lastly, NATO has a unique ability to link SP with policy making in host nations to close legal voids, provided the rules of engagement allow for such. Another strength of NATO SP in relation to CPP is the expertise and experience in policing. The known best practices of SP, in addition to the credibility of NATO SP in providing police services, allows for the creation of human capital in host nations. It is not just NATO, but also the existing and potential partnerships that are valuable. For example, links to relevant non-military actors at the international level. Within the host nations, the ability to build trust remains of vital importance in creating sustainable relationships. This can occur at various levels and in different situations, from training host nations in crisis contexts to steering processes, advising on institutional reformations, aiding in the development of legal frameworks, and implementing agreed-upon reforms. Importantly, NATO SP officers can contribute a positive attitude rooted in a willingness to help with the identified needs of host nations. With regard to the weaknesses, as with any agency, weaknesses exist, though some of these can be turned into opportunities or developed into strengths if proper resources are devoted to such. One potential weakness derives from hostility from the host community. This will be particularly context-specific, as depending on the location, a perception of untrustworthiness of SP forces might exist. Similarly, NATO member states largely have had a neo-colonial past, so may be associated with those times, possibly antagonizing the local population. Linguistic communication and a lack of cultural awareness can create significant barriers to completing CPP. From a communication standpoint, insufficient connection with the host community impacts outcomes, and depending on the SP on CPP mandate, connecting with the host community might be a challenge. A gap with the narrative of local media on the purpose of NATO SP in CPP can add to communication barriers as well. Going hand in hand with linguistic communication, a lack of cultural awareness can present significant problems. Dr. Rush illustrated this for us in her example with the soldiers and the crocodile. However, we also want to point out that in addition to an anthropological understanding of differing cultural values, it is also vital for NATO SP forces to comprehend the demographic differences in access and behavioral patterns, such as those of gender, class, ethnicity, and religion. Our group also discussed weaknesses derived from unclear mandates and the lack of political and societal support for a CPP. Unpredictable ethical dilemmas can be difficult to tackle in the field given the peculiarity of CPP. A lack of a defined legal framework and/or clear NATO guidelines for situations encountered can create problems. The lack of an omnicomprehensive cultural property database adds to the barriers surrounding CPP in host nations. CPP faces additional hurdles with the realities confronted on the ground, such as sometimes just in meeting the basic needs of locals. This can be exacerbated by a mismatch between the tasks laid out in the mandate and the capabilities of the forces on the ground. Our last major point under weaknesses revolves around the need to improve the availability, quantity, and quality of human resources as well as equipment for CPP to effectively answer host nations' calls for engagement in operations. For example, currently there is an insufficient capacity to investigate the financial aspects of crimes involving cultural property, as well as suboptimal links with national forces asking for help. Opportunities, returning to the positive. CPP and SP is supported within the organization by the NATO member countries and communities, and opportunities exist for the various types of support available. NATO has power, experience, and resources to leverage in developing relationships with host nations and can build upon the legitimacy and experiences from previous operations. Another important category in making CPP more effective revolves around the available supporting technologies. For example, over the past couple of days, several people have raised the point regarding a need for a cultural property database that can be accessed and used more effectively than the disparate ones that currently exist. Similarly, we suggest the development of a database of cultural property experts with a variety of specialties that can be contacted and consulted, especially on short notice when emergency situations arise. In this vein, it is vital to regularly conduct data analysis on key performance indicators of NATO operations to ensure evidence-based policies maximize the effectiveness of future operations. Some of this analysis should also derive from stakeholders' feedback on CPP performance in order to make improvements from that angle as well. There are several opportunities for general and specific training for SP officers in CPP. A significant aid in such would be the creation of a handbook for SP in CPP. This kind of training can also help build the trust of host nations towards NATO's CPP and SP, and in turn be used to train local police in CPP, one aspect of increasing resilience with respect to CPP. Going hand in hand with local training is raising awareness of CPP and increasing the involvement of underrepresented groups, such as women, in CPP. Related to this type of opportunity is the ability to tie SP and CPP to the socioeconomic reconstruction of a host nation. This involves collaborating with local communities to better understand their priorities regarding their cultural property and its protection. Overall, several opportunities exist to coordinate with other actors at various levels operating in CPP. Additionally, we wanted to note the chances that exist to improve support domestically and in host nations using key communication tools to create appropriate and favorable narratives revolving around CPP and NATO's role in such. The last opportunity we would like to highlight here is the ability to oppose irregular actors conducting hybrid warfare. As an addendum, we were advised to be careful with such terms as collaboration and coordination, so I want to note that in the places such terms were used, we recognize that we really mean creating the best possible interactions between NATO, SP, and CPP and the other groups identified in context. So lastly, in regard to threats, one of the first we identified is the presence of organized crime and/or terrorist groups targeting cultural property for destruction and/or for economic reasons. We discussed the additional possibility of a vicious cycle and overlap between organized crime and terrorist groups in some regions with regard to interest in cultural property. Given how many of us have likely had to attempt to convince colleagues or others of the importance of cultural heritage, we also wanted to highlight the issues that a lack of commitment and interest in CPP from NATO officers as well as host nations can present significant barriers. An unwelcoming local population may reject CPP efforts, or the corruption of actors, such as that of local law enforcement personnel, can prevent successful CPP efforts. As such, it is important, but sometimes difficult, to manage the expectations of CPP efforts and be clear about potential limitations depending on available resources, both those of NATO and local communities. A recurring theme in several aspects of the SWOT analysis does revolve around communication, and here we discuss the strategic communication from adversaries and enemies against NATO's efforts in CPP. The lack of unity in the effort put forth, intent, political agreement, as well as prioritization of CPP objectives can create discord and difficulty in fulfilling elements of CPP. Similarly, competition and/or a lack of coordination with similar organizations invested in CPP potentially generates further issues. Another point related to communication involves the receipt of unreliable intelligence and other information, making it difficult or impossible to act. While we tried to be careful about not mirroring strengths and weaknesses as well as opportunities and threats, we do believe one such item is worthy of note due to the potential consequences. The flip side of increased in communication and raising awareness of cultural property and its value is that it can correlate to a rise in cultural sites targeted by organized crime and terrorist groups. In other words, a list of valued cultural property items or cultural heritage sites risks becoming a kind of shopping list for such groups targeting specific or similar types of objects known to be coveted by collectors. To be clear, we are just noting the potential ripple effect from such actions in order that they may be taken into account while planning and used to anticipate changes in behavioral responses of criminal groups to CPP efforts in a region. Are we doing the recommendations? 4? We also did come up with 4 priority recommendations based on the SWOT analysis. Perhaps the most importantly, we think it essential to develop and strengthen NATO's approach to CPP in SP in terms of policy, doctrine, and other publications. We would like to see increased involvement of underrepresented groups working on CPP in NATO, and then use that example to help foster diverse participation in CPP activities in host nations. Many points in our SWOT analysis revolved around various aspects of cultural awareness, and we identified this as a key area of improvement for the SPUs performing CPP. Lastly, we want to see the encouragement and improvement in the exchange of information between stakeholder groups, including the creation of supporting databases. That was group 3.
Thank you very much. It was a very comprehensive presentation. And if it would be possible to give us the speaking points, maybe by mail, so we can use them also. Thank you very much. So, last but not least, Group 4. I can perceive a little bias from the front row. Yes.
So my name is Ankie Petersen. I'm a CPP officer in the section Cultural Affairs and Information within the CMI Commando, the CIMIC Command of the Royal Dutch Armed Forces. And I have the challenge of presenting the last SWOT analysis while also being the last barrier between you and coffee. So I hope you have a little bit of an attention span left after these 3 excellent presentations that have already been given. And I want to avoid repeating too much of the same points. So what I will do is I will elaborate a little bit more on the points that, according to our discussion, were the most important ones. And I will elaborate a little bit less on the ones that are, of course, already been given by the other presentations. So first of all, the part of the strengths. Well, this is a point, the first one that, of course, has already been mentioned quite a lot, but it's still an important one, is that the combination of military, police, and police competences and skills makes stability policing quite unique for cultural property protection. And this is a strength that we can use to our advantage. And as was also mentioned yesterday by the presentation of Mr. Stefano Bergonzini, is that stability policing is an open club, and it really is. So this is one of the strengths that we found really important to mention. Secondly, we already have a template of success, by which we mean that there are, of course, already a lot of experiences that we can build upon. Yesterday I was told I cannot name them best practices because there's always, of course, something to improve, so I will call them good practices. But we have good practices around, and we should build upon these good practices and learn from them. So thirdly, there is a global support and global networking that already exists in stability policing. And this ties into a few points that we mentioned below this one, is that there is increasing efficient technology that is open to use for CPP. For example, the app that was mentioned yesterday in the presentation of Interpol. And aside from that, there is a network of training centers as well. So there is already a lot in place which we can use to improve our CPP practice. Thirdly, there is an international legal framework that we can use as a basis for our practice. This is a strength. And there is also an international mindset by the people who are usually involved in stability policing. The Carabinieri has an international mindset by the nature of their work, and the same what we can say of other military police forces in different countries. So this is also a strength that can be used in CPP. Lastly, existing partners and networks. This doesn't only tie into the fact that there are already relations with, for example, Interpol, as I mentioned before, but also we have networks, we can see this in the room that we are in right now, that consists of people from academia, who have done extensive studies on CPP in practice. We have networks with people from other armed forces. These are networks that we can use also to our advantage and are very important, in our opinion, to be able to really execute CPP on an international level. So one of the points that I skipped, I need to come back to, is the point of strategic communication. That was, of course, also mentioned several times already in this presentation cycle. But I would like to stress that the message of stability policing, the message of bringing security and stability, is a very strong message, as is the message of cultural property protection. And we need to use these messages to our advantage to be able to win the hearts and minds, which was already mentioned as well, but is a very important point, to be able to win the hearts and minds of local population. So this ties into the last point of resilience. The work of the military police, of the work of stability policing, is a work that is focused on a positive impact for the future. So this positive message of bringing stability and bringing security is something that can really help to win these hearts and minds, and to be able to, to bring resilience for local population in practice. So the next one, the weaknesses. So first of all, we discussed that there still is quite a colonial approach to archaeology, or maybe to heritage management in general, that affects our work in practice. And what this comes down to are 2 points. First of all, that a limited knowledge of our own military history can work to our disadvantage. We can see that, for example, in practice, where a local population in, to name a country, Mali, would act differently towards French armed forces than towards Dutch armed forces or British armed forces. So to have a macro perspective on the history, the military history, and the history of the relations between different countries is very important to be able to be successful in the field. Second of all, Western norms on cultural heritage and on cultural property protection, they limit our scope on what we need to do in practice, while at the same time might cause a discrepancy between what local population needs. So the local population might view cultural heritage differently than we do, and this is something that we need to take into account while we move to do some things abroad. And this ties into the next point as well, as that it is important what we need to understand, what we need to protect, and that a lack of understanding of what we need to protect can be a weakness. We might focus on human terrain analysis on UNESCO World Heritage sites that are designated, that are on a list, while at the same time in practice the local population might find another building or another burial site much more important that was on our World Heritage list. So this is an example that it's important to be able to use a local perspective, to engage with the local community, to really understand what is important to protect for them. So the next point, a lack of understanding of what is CPP. This is a point that was mentioned a lot today, is that we still, in general, really need to develop what we understand is CPP and how we need to deploy CPP. And this is something that counts for my own work environment as well. We have a small section of 2 people who are experienced in CPP, but if the other people in the CIMIC command don't understand why it is important and don't agree with what we do, then we have a difficult situation. So, furthermore, a lack of NATO doctrine was also mentioned a lot during the last days, so I won't elaborate on that one. A lack of specialized unit. Of course, we have the Carabinieri, but what happens if the Carabinieri say, grazie, ma no grazie? What do we have left then? So this is an important point for us as well, that we need to develop stability policing in CPP on an international level. Also see what, for example, the Dutch marechaussee can do, or what other military police units can do from other countries. Ties into the next point, lack of personnel with specialized training, which was already mentioned a lot of times. So I want to move on to the next point, which is that there are, of course, always, when we are working in the field, and especially on CPP, there are multiple stakeholders with multiple agendas. I think even in this room, there are a lot of stakeholders with multiple agendas. So then it becomes really important to, when we want to work together, that we communicate openly about these agendas and see how we can align our interests. So the last 2 points of the weaknesses, the military posture and perception, also already mentioned, and the lack of knowledge on stability policing, what is stability policing, but also what is stability policing for different military police units of different countries. And here we come also to the point of that we need to have a general understanding of each other's cultures, of each other's ways of communication. For example, for myself, I'm from the Netherlands. We are generally viewed as, well, quite direct people that communicate quite directly. People from other cultures, from other countries, from other units might not appreciate that way of communication that well. So here the point of intercultural comprehension comes into play as well. If you don't have that, that will be a weakness. So then we move on to the point of opportunities. Well, what we discussed yesterday and what I've heard also from the other presentations is, of course, that there is a lot of work to be done, and we can regard this as an opportunity. There is a need to fill the training gap, and what we already noticed yesterday during the dinner is that there is a lot of willingness to fill this training gap. We had Wolfgang with a presentation on the next CPP conference that will take place in Austria next year. So this is an opportunity that we can exploit, that there are a lot of people, also in this room even, that have a lot of energy, a lot of spirit to do something with CPP and to move this topic forward. So other opportunities. The CPP can play an important role in several fields to improve the livelihood of people. For example, economic development, the return of tourism related to cultural property. It can improve the resilience of a local population, and it can help also with the social reconciliation in a situation where there was before maybe a conflict related to culture. So another point that I would like to stress is that it's not only, CPP is not only beneficial to the location where CPP is being done, it is also beneficial to the people who are engaging in it. Which means that while we are engaged with CPP, we are at the same time bringing a lot of knowledge home, and a lot of knowledge that we might be able to use in the future when there might be a conflict related to culture. So the next point, CPP is also an opportunity to build collaborations with humanitarian missions, also a point that was mentioned before. So I want to move on to the last points of the opportunities, is that CPP is basically also a practice that can be used for intelligence gathering. It can be used to identify adversaries or members of communities that support the mission, but generally CPP is a way to gather intelligence about the situation in place, about the tensions that might be there. And what we've also seen in historical analysis of conflicts, that when culture is targeted, this is often one of the first steps of an escalating conflict. So if we are able to identify in which way culture is playing a role in a certain conflict, we might also be able to intervene in a better way. So the last one, CPP as a force multiplier. I think this is a point that ties in that ties into all the other points of the opportunities that were just mentioned, and that we can all agree on that CPP can help a mission forward. But it is nice that we agree on this, but of course it is of the utmost importance that we convince others that this is the case. So lastly, the threats. Well, what we discussed yesterday is, of course, that in the field of CPP and also in the field of, in the situation of stability policing missions, there are so many people, so many opinions, and as was also eloquently put, lots of cooks in the kitchen. And this means that there are a lot of conflicting goals that might be there, a lot of different agendas that might be going on, which might result in a lack of cooperation. So it is important to be able to be aware of these multiple players and multiple goals that are in the field. Otherwise, this becomes a threat to your practice. The second point is also, in my opinion, a very important point. As I notice in my own work, is that there are often a lot of unrealistic expectations about what we can do and what we cannot do. To name an example, there was a flood last summer in Limburg, and a lot of people from the cultural heritage field were asking us, calling us, emailing us, saying, where are you guys? Where is the CPP unit of the Royal Dutch Armed Forces? Well, this is of course not the way that things work, that there is a crisis and we appear, we manifest, and we are there to help. We need to manage the expectations of what we can do and also tell people how these kind of processes work. That, for example, the army will be involved if there is an order that comes down the chain of command. But also the other way around, it is important to communicate the expectations towards the community of what we are there to do. So then it is important to really make realistic promises in your mandate and not oversell or overpromise what you will do in your mission. So the last points, there is of course, well, a lack of understanding of the importance of CPP in general. This is something that was mentioned a lot already before. And there is the risk, a threat of losing a public opinion losing a public opinion of the host nation for the support of your mission. There is a lack also often of a host nation legal framework. And this ties also into the next point, that conflicts often evolve a lot faster than legal frameworks do. Our work is of course based for a large part also on the Hague Convention, but it is good to realize that this convention was created in 1954, which is already a long time ago. And these kinds of international frameworks, but also national legal frameworks, they need updating to be able to correspond to what is happening actually in practice. So then I would like to conclude with the last point, is that we need to realize that CPP can also lead to criminal hostility while we are doing the work. Of course, some people are engaged in looting out of criminal incentives. They want to make money out of it on the international market, but also it's important to realize that in some cases it is simply the local population that might sell cultural goods also because they simply don't have a choice anymore in a situation of conflict. But this will mean that if you engage in CPP, that you are basically also depriving people of their income. And this will lead, or this can lead, to a hostile reaction. So with this last point I would like to conclude. I see everybody is still awake, so that is a good sign. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned before, we are a little bit early, but I anticipated the coffee break, so the coffee is waiting for you. So what I would like to do, because now we have to do some work here at the presidency table, so if you can break now, we will meet back here at 10:30 Swiss time, not Italian time, and yeah, and enjoy the coffee break. Thank you.
Shall I do? Okay. Shall I have a look into your camera? Okay, I'm just talking about the points now. I just presented it, but you're welcome. May I have a look at my photo? Like a more serious one. Yeah, so again talking of topics and about So, Alpha, how did you like my presentation? Was it good? Was it good? Okay. So, did you like the points?
Let me see. Yes.
They were more. I thought they were more short than compared to the others. So.
Yeah, that's because you were the first one.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Absolutely. Okay. I will see. Yeah, maybe a little bit like these are the photos from down there, but maybe I should talk a little bit more like that. So look in that direction, say a few words to the first row, just sitting right here, so right empty now.
Bene. Ladies and gentlemen, please take a seat. We're about to begin. So, again, another token of success, people coming back from the coffee break. So I'm very happy. Or it could be that everyone wants to leave early, so nobody was late because they have to catch a plane. In both cases, I've hit my benchmark. Now, as I announced this morning, what I will try to do now, I will try to summarize a little bit the discussion we had, and then we will be open for some questions and answers and some clarifications, because I have to warn you, when the 4 PowerPoints were presented, I hadn't had my coffee yet. So it's very likely that I probably forgot some points. But to be honest, I have an advantage that, not being an expert on cultural property, I try to pin down what I think are the main conclusions of the 4 PowerPoint presentations that we have presented. So, can you please put it on the screen, Stefano? First of all, when I present outcomes, I always like to divide them, why, what, who, where, when, and how. And I will not talk about the how, because the how will something that our director and Stefano will talk, because they will be the ones who carry the ball forward, to use a rugby expression. I will, however, like to talk about the why as the first point, because normally when I sit at your place, the thing I'm most interested about is, why are we here? Why? Because if I don't understand why, I just start looking at the ceiling, I just start playing with my phone. So why are we here? We are here to discuss about cultural property, but most importantly, why should NATO do something with cultural property? Because this is the big question. Should NATO do something with cultural property? And should stability policing be doing something on cultural property? It's not a given, it's not something that when we stepped in 3 days ago, it was not something that was given. So, also because, as we mentioned, if we look at the doctrine, and if we look at the first annex to the stability policing doctrine, cultural property protection is not one of the tasks which are normally attributed to stability policing. So, but let's move. So, why? First of all, we said, why is this so important? It's a bridge with the local population. So it's an unconventional way. It's a way that NATO can use to go beyond the obvious in approaching the local population. We also saw, however, that this can have 2 phases. So on one hand, NATO, when I say NATO in this case, I'm talking about stability policing assets within NATO, of course. So when the police approaches the local population, it can have 2 phases, because on one side, it can be perceived positively that stability policing are trying to protect the cultural heritage and the cultural property in a country. On the other hand, the socio-economic conditions of that country, and especially of the people that are physically on the spot, can be so bad and so dire that they can see, let's say, looting and selling goods as a survival strategy. So, strong point, this can be used as a tool for SP, an unconventional tool, but we have to be very careful, because it could also be perceived negatively. We will talk about awareness later on. NATO, why is it so important to have NATO here? Because NATO is very often a first responder. Even if we had, and we don't, but let's say we had an international organization with 20,000 Silvio Mele who are experts in cultural property protection. A war or a conflict starts. Would they have, in isolation, the robustness to be deployed in the front line? They probably wouldn't, because they would probably be experts in the field of cultural property, but they would only be able to intervene after the situation is stable, because of physical security. But NATO, so NATO is the only international organization, or the strongest international organization, that has this possibility to be in the front line from day one. This means, and this came up also during our discussion, that yes, indeed, there is a role for NATO, because before the handover to somebody else, to another organization, or to the local government takes over, it can take years. But when the kinetic part of the conflict is really high, NATO is the only one there. So within NATO, who is going to investigate? Because looting, looting doesn't start when the conflict finishes. It's overlapping. We mentioned it several times in our working group. I was the police station commander of Ercolano, And Ercolano is in Italy, it's not in Iraq or in Afghanistan, and there was looting in Ercolano, and cultural artifacts were sold. So there's even a stronger reason in a conflict area. Strategic communication. So if we want to win the heart and minds of the local population, it is very important to use the protection of cultural property as kind of a crowbar to open the heart. However, this, again, has two faces, because it can also be used to go against a mission. And we know that very often cultural property can be used or misused to fuel, ethnic hatred, ethnic cleansing, etc., etc. So the conclusion is that strategic communication is, let's say, deeply interlinked with cultural property protection, but it needs to be managed properly, and we need to make sure that the right message is being passed, otherwise it can fuel even more conflicts or hatred. Interoperability, flexibility, we see that in this particular field, this is not a typically military field. This is something of a hybrid field, because, okay, you have stability policing that have a military background, of course, like the Carabinieri, but who are also the experts in the field? You have the academic world, you have people working in the museums, so you have a very, very wide and diverse, let's say, community of interest who need to be working together. This is one of those areas that cannot be progressed in isolation by the police. It needs to be, let's say, comprehensively taken care of. So there is this possibility, so by using stability policing, there is this possibility, there is this bridge between the military environment, strictly military environment, and the civilian, not just the civilian population, but here we are talking about the wider civilian community of interest. It can be the local civilian community of interest, or it can be other international organizations, such as many that are here present today, who can be found in a field, in a theater of NATO operations. So, this brings me to my next point. The cultural property is an excellent way to foster civil and military interaction. It's not a coincidence that within NATO, CIMIC plays a strong role with regards to cultural property protection. Then we spoke about the legal framework, and we say that, yes, there are a series of international instruments, but there is also a lack of a common understanding of the definitions. So again, is this a strength? Is this a weakness? Some identify that having a legal framework, having an international legal framework is a point of strength, but almost all the groups also identify that lack of definitions, lack of a common understanding of what cultural property, cultural heritage is, causes some problems. And this, of course, trickles down in a very practical level. So this legal problem, or legal challenge, let's say, at high level, it trickles down at practitioner's level. And this legal framework is not also, let's say, if we talk about it in the wider sense, we're not just talking about the legal framework related to cultural property protection, but we were talking also about rules of engagement. Why? Because one of the outcomes of, for example, of our working group yesterday is how far are we willing to go to protect cultural property? Now, it is clear, if somebody is attacking me, it is most likely that my rules of engagement will allow me to shoot back. But if I'm sitting in front of a museum and somebody is attacking the museum, what can I do? How far can I do? Can I shoot or not? What can I do? Can I use force? So, big challenge here. Then we had the issue of trust. So it's a bit linked to what I discussed about before about the local population. So it's not just building trust, so stability policing used to build trust with the local population, but also trust in the community of interest. So sometimes there is distrust even between different actors, let's say, working for the same purpose. They don't trust each other, and so they don't share information with each other. And of course, the big issue, the big elephant in the room, which is corruption, because very often when there is a conflict zone, the situation is very bad, and people very often resort to corruption, not just to survive, but that's the petty corruption, but also at high level. And I think we all know, we all have access to newspapers, so I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. A big issue because it's linked to trust, and it's also linked to the trust of the population, because if I am an inhabitant of an area and I want to sell a piece of art for £60, $60, 60 euros, whatever, if I don't trust my government, if I don't trust those who are supposed to protect the cultural heritage, who maybe are really corrupt and they are corrupt in the millions of euros, I am not going to renounce to my 60 euros, because, you know, the example comes from above. We then discussed, debated about another issue, and it's the issue of expertise. So we said, yes, positive news, we have people who are experts in this particular field. So that's positive news. However, let's be careful. We have problems because the level of expertise is uneven around the communities. Some countries can use some capabilities that other countries don't have. Or maybe in other countries, these capabilities are not a military capability, but come from another area of the public administration, so it's more difficult to be used. And quantity. So is it realistic that I am going to receive 1,000 experts on cultural property in a theatre of operation? It's not realistic. Do we have them? So we have the expertise, yes, it's not enough. And how far, and this is a question for the countries, how far the countries are willing to invest in this? And this links, but I think I will come on to it in a minute, this links to prioritization. We saw that through cultural property protection, there is, so cultural property in general, there is an opportunity for networking and for inclusiveness. So to go beyond the military world and to include all the stakeholders. Although I said we also have to keep in mind the problem about trust and corruption. So this, again, many of these points are positives but also negatives. There are opportunities but are also threats. Awareness is very important, and awareness in the wider sense. So the local population, the local inhabitants need to understand why it is important that they take care of their cultural heritage and their cultural property. All the actors, all the stakeholders need to have this level of awareness, because if somebody doesn't understand why he should not be looting a site, the battle is lost from the start. So this is really important. But it's also important that those who are working for NATO, the troops that are in the field, have this level of awareness. They need to understand why. I started this discussion by saying that for me the most important point is the why. Because if I've been, we gave the example, I managed to break the microphone, I hope it's not a piece of cultural heritage. We managed to discuss yesterday, make a point about the army platoon which is sent to protect a museum and has no background in cultural property. They need to understand why it's important that they're protecting that museum. They need to understand that they are part of something bigger, otherwise the effectiveness is very limited. And this brings to the next point, which is training. There was a call for a handbook on cultural property protection, but training in the wider sense is very important. Pre-mission training, in-mission training for staff, but also training for the local authorities, training for those who need to know this topic. And this, of course, all of this links to resilience. So if we protect the cultural property, we are also making the country more resilient. We also made a point yesterday about the economy of a country. If a country, so economy of a country and disengagement, meaning that by protecting and safeguarding the cultural property, it is easier, not easy, but easier for NATO to disengage from a particular theatre of operation, and it's easier to explain, to make the country resilient, because maybe in a particular country, not of course during a conflict, but after 10 or 20 years, the country could start surviving on tourism rather than other forms of economy. And yesterday in my working group, I brought the example of northern part of Iraq. When I was in Baghdad in 2013, I was told that there are very important archaeological sites there, and the local population, local governments, let's say, were investing in building tourist, let's say, facilities for this. Because they would say, okay, they're not going to come today, the tourists, but when eventually the situation will calm down, we're gonna start profiting from this. big issue not just for cultural property, but for many other areas that are covered by NATO, unfortunately, competing priority. The so-called military approach, this was brought up. So we have to do something about it. We have to do something about it. And then, because if we don't do something about it, somebody else will do something about it. And this sometimes causes problems in coordination and problems in prioritization and duplications. So this has been identified as a challenge. Another big problem, another big challenge, I don't like to say problems, I'd like to say challenge. Priority. Are we sure that this particular area of work is receiving the right level of priority? Because on paper, in this room here, I don't need to convince anyone of the importance of cultural property, but we also have to be realistic and we have to steer away from rabbit holes. It was said yesterday. Are we sure that when there is a kinetic battle being fought and when people are dying, we will give the right level of priority to cultural property? So there needs to be commitment, and it really needs to be understood that cultural property is linked with security and it's linked with stabilization and reconstruction. Otherwise, you know, you can do the right thing, but if the right thing is not also the most pragmatic thing, the right thing doesn't really carry a lot of weight. This, of course, is a consequence of political will. So there needs to be political will behind the real political will behind the protection of cultural property. Otherwise, these will just be policies on paper that will not be implemented. Next slide, please. We then identified resources. It was brought up a couple of times. If the NATO mission in the field has 100 people, if we put 30 of these 100 people working on cultural property, then we will have 70 to do the rest. So this is a challenge. We need to make sure that the right resources are given to cultural property, because the money is always tight. So we're talking about financial resources, which in turn are linked to manpower, etc., etc., etc. Doctrine, we mentioned it before, this is a duplication. Definitions, you know, it may seem something which is not that relevant, but it is very relevant, because if we don't start, the building blocks start, the basic building block is a shared definition. Once you have a shared definition, you can start building everything on top. Because if you don't have a shared definition, you will be talking about different things. I mentioned it already, economic sustainability, very important. So as an Italian, I see how many points of our gross domestic product come from tourism. So people need to understand that protecting cultural property, once again, is not just the right thing to do, it is also the most intelligent and clever things to do. I mentioned already the NATO disengagement. And then we had another important point, which was social reconciliation. And then I wrote in brackets, or the opposite of social reconciliation. Because we saw that very often, history, we had both positive and negative examples in our working group. So sometimes protecting cultural property on behalf of NATO can help various actors, let's say various opposing factions, to, let's say, better engage in peace talks. Sometimes the fact that you are protecting a particular site, in the eyes of the factions, it means you're taking a stance. So the international community is impartial, but the moment you start protecting a particular site, it can be perceived that you're taking a stance in favor of this or that particular group. So again, this is food for thought. Cultural property protection is clearly, for the reasons I just highlighted, a tool for diplomacy, very important tool for diplomacy. But then another important aspect is that it can fuel, of course, war, we just said it, but also crime, organized crime. And there are several overlaps with terrorism as well. I mean, ISIS was the example. Everyone saw the videos of ISIS. So once again, linking cultural property with something pragmatic. Why should we work on cultural property? Because by defending cultural property, most probably you're also severing some of the financial flows that then are used by criminals and by terrorists to buy weapons and to fund terrorist attacks. So, you know, It is unimportant if this happens in 100% of cases or 10% of cases. This is unimportant. The important is that there is this link, and it should be looked at. And stability policing, of course, because of the investigation capability it has, can help to highlight this link. Money laundering, for the same reason, sometimes we know cultural property is used to launder money. This is not a secret. Intelligence, again, stability policing is one of its strongest points is the capacity to gather intelligence. But also, we said it at the beginning, with this interaction between the civilian and the military world is also a way to collect intelligence. Because by interacting with people that are completely separate from the military mission, they may be in possession of information that the military don't have. So it's a very good way to receive intelligence. Now we also have some big challenges, so lack of information. So what we said on the first day, many presentations identified this. We don't sometimes know where the cultural sites are. We don't know where they are. We don't know how many there are. So this is a big challenge. Also, it's a big challenge when you give the troops a map and there are no sites on the map. So either because we don't know there are sites there, nobody knows that there are particular sites there, maybe they are there but they never been mapped, or because it's just nobody thinks about it. Because if I'm not an expert on cultural property and I would be preparing, handing over some material, maybe I wouldn't think about putting the cultural sites on the map. Lack of inventories, this was brought up several times. Also during the lunches and the dinners we had, many people said this, that sometimes you don't even know what is missing, what is not missing. There's not like a shopping list where you can say this particular group of items is missing or not. So this is a big issue. We spoke about databases, information knowledge management. I know there is some work that is being currently done in this field. Our colleague also from Interpol and also our colleagues from the Carabinieri Tutela Patrimonio Culturale showed us some of the state-of-the-art technology they use. There are challenges also related to databases which were highlighted. For example, the fact that some databases are not interconnected, some countries do not upload in the database the material they have. Sometimes it's done on purpose because there's a confidential investigation going on. Sometimes it's just because people don't know they have to upload the databases. But one of the strong points of stability policing is the availability of technology. For example, NATO may use drones, may use very high-level technological tools, which they can use in any activity they do, but also in the protection of cultural property. So this is a very, very important point. And then the thing I think is probably one of the most important when we are talking about missions, unrealistic expectations. So when we approach a mission thinking that we have a counterpart which is exactly like the people we have at home, this is totally unrealistic. So the results that we expect should be tailored to the kind of environment we find. We should not think that we will have a perfect copy of the Tutela del Patrimonio Culturale in Iraq after 2 years of deployment. This is a big problem. Why is also a big problem? Because many of the missions take place in areas of the world which used to be colonies. And this idea that Western powers can go there and maybe from the same nationality of the colonists 100 years before and try to impose their view on how things should be done can cause frustration in the hosting country. And I remember we organized a training at the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence, and one of the points that came out on mentoring, one officer from a particular country asked me, but would you be happy if somebody from, United Kingdom would walk into your office, sit near you, and suddenly start telling you how you should do things. Oh, you're doing this wrong, you should do this, 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 this. Maybe you've been doing this for 30 years. So this is where, international expectations should be tailored, and also local expectations, could be unrealistic. Please, let's move to the next slide, if we have a next slide. Yes. Fantastic. So the next slide is empty. That means that unrealistic expectation was my last point. So why did I present this? This is more or less what I tried to capture from all the presentations that we were delivered this morning. I think the SWOT analysis is a very good opportunity to brainstorm. In addition, of course, to identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, it's also a good way to get information from people that otherwise maybe would not be encouraged to talk or to speak. This is what I gathered here. I started why, what, who, where, and when. Why, I just explained why the protection of cultural property is really important for NATO and for stability policing within NATO. So what? We spoke about legal definition, lack of legal definition. We spoke about rules of engagement. We spoke about the law in general, local law. If there is no law that protects the cultural property, what is the police going to do? Nothing. So this is really important. Who will be dealing this? We said stability policing has a role, but we also said that this is a particular field of work which is comprehensive and it includes the wider community of interest. So we will have experts, we will have local communities, we will have stakeholders. We mentioned museums, we mentioned the academic world, and these are the experts, so these are the guys that should be sitting in the room. We have Blue Shield, we had a very interesting presentation yesterday. So this is where we are. Wherever there is a theater of a NATO mission. No, we had Afghanistan, we have a NATO mission in Iraq, we still have KFOR in the Balkans. So wherever there's an opportunity for a deployment for NATO, cultural property, the protection of cultural property should have the right level of importance. When, very important, immediately. A famous British magician who used to play tricks on television used to say that good timing is invisible, but bad timing sticks out a mile. So as soon as we can start protecting cultural property, the better, the sooner the better. Because sometimes, as I said, people who are looting, they don't even know maybe that there's a war going on, they just do it. So the sooner we can protect, the better it is. Now the last point, the how. So my job was really easy. My job was to gather information and to present this information. But how will this be achieved? So with the how, I would like to give the floor to Colonel De Magistris and Chief Warrant Officer Stefano Bergonzini. But before I do so, I would like to give the floor to the audience, because I would like for you to think if we are missing something, if I missed something during my presentation, if you think that there's a point that I missed that you would like to add, if there is a comment you would like to make. I think we are all here to listen from you, because you are the experts. I'm not the expert, you are the experts. So I think you probably have something very interesting to say. So before I give the floor to the NATO Stability Police and Center of Excellence leadership, please, the floor is yours. Microphone is coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very exhaustive recap of what we said during this very interesting conference. I just would like to raise one point. From the discussion we had also in the working group and your presentation, I see there is kind of the attention is given mainly to crisis response operation, non-Article 5 operation. We might want to give a little bit more emphasis of the relevant on SP and CPP in NATO, but in Article 5, because we all know where the discussions are going at the moment. And what I see is, sure, Afghanistan, we all have experiences in missions, so Afghanistan, Iraq, as you said, KFOR, but also good to take into consideration possible missions or possible operations in an Article 5 operation in NATO. Because I think, sorry, just the last point, and because cultural property protection, especially in Article 5 operation, is really something that also people can relate to, and you risk by not considering Article 5 to make yourself irrelevant to the current discourse.
Mariana, you hit the nail on the head. Indeed, stability policing can be deployed across the full spectrum of operation, before, during, and after a conflict. In any in any of the NATO operational teams, so collective defense, Article 5, crisis response operation, but it is even a means in cooperative security. I will not go into depth because then I will steal the floor to you and this is your moment. So in stability policing, it is indeed a means to bring about stabilization, safe and secure environment, freedom of movement during a conflict in a collective defense scenario. This is something which has been underrated, but it's something which we have been advocating for. So, fully supporting this line, we will stress even this in our letter. Let me say also that, there is I usually make an example. When there is a flood, which wipes out everything, a tsunami, it wipes out everything, police stations included. The same applies in a collective defense scenario. The first push from the orange parties wipes out everything. Somebody is to fill the capability gap of the police because the police disappear. Usually they are either wiped out or they desert because they want to protect their families. Or maybe they enroll in the army. So somebody is to fill the gap. The only problem that we have been facing with our counterpart when we speak about stability policing, collective defense, is that they feel the deployment of stability policing asset as a limitation of the sovereignty of the state. This is not the case. We deploy to contribute to the safe and secure environment, respecting the applicable legal framework in that given state, if we are talking about an ally. I don't know whether I was clear.
Yeah, thank you. It's just to connect actually to the previous intervention. I think that the use of Article 5 is also, beside all you have just underlined, I think it is also very useful to change the perception that communities around the world have about NATO. I think that if you ask even people that, international organization, if you are really not inside security or defense sector, you will not even know what is stability policing. If I ask colleagues of mine which come from gendarmerie or, but they are never actually dealt with an international environment, they will not know. So promoting SP to CPP, I think that require a step before, which is promoting the role of stability policing. And I think that in situations like, for instance, NATO intervention in Libya, I was there during the airstrike and the land strike. And if you would ask people, yesterday we spoke a lot about how the intervention is received by community, they will all be scared to death because the only thing that they had in head, it was seeing the bombing of the NATO all over the country for I think 6 or 7 months, and every day. I think it's very important the use of Article 5, promoting the new, a new image of the NATO and all the different sectors that in which NATO can intervene, because as of today, the image that NATO has outside, the HQ and is not really the one of stability policing and CPP or law enforcement. Is more like military intervention. And actually, you inspire me when you put as the second point, first responder. No, that is true. It's first responder, first military responder. So we remember NATO for the Balkans, for Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. And I think that this is an image that needs to be changed. Thank you.
To complement, thanks. In my life, I never heard anyone said, you inspired me, so thank you very much. The coffee, I will pay for a coffee, and I will call my wife, and I will pass her on to you. So, but apart from that, what you said is really interesting, because in a completely different field, which is human trafficking, I was working on human trafficking years ago, this image is crucial. Some of the victims, they were completely reluctant to work with the police, because some of them have been raped by the police. So they associated uniform equals rapes. And those who came from conflict areas associated military uniforms equal rape. So they were, you know, in one part of the world, they had been trafficked to serve the military operating in the area. But this is another topic. It could be another conference, but.
Which is organizing, by the way.
Which I will probably organize next year. But when they come, you know, and they encounter stability policing, when they encounter the police, like you said, you know, it's the same with the bombers. You know, if your idea of the bombers, NATO equal bombers, you will never trust the alliance because these are the guys who killed my uncle, you know, in the bombing. So it's a good way to rebrand, let's say, the activity for the same reasons that if your idea in mind is a uniform equals they're gonna rape me, you've lost the battle. So again, trying to serve in some cases, for example, even a different color uniform was shown to be a positive step because in the conflict they were used to green uniforms. If you just change the color of the uniform, they would understand you were somebody different than the belligerent parts. So it's very important. So thank you very much for your point, and I fully support it.
It's not just the perception of non-NATO allies member, but also our member states. So I think that this is even more important to change among member states and community.
May I chip in?
You don't understand? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead, please. So may I chip in, Mr. Chairman? May I chip in?
Considering you are armed and you're my boss, yes, you can chip in.
Nicola, Teresa, Marianna, Yata guy, the young disruptors, where are you? Nicola, I can see you. Please stand up. Camilla, Teresa, okay. Round of applause for them. Yata exists in how many countries, Nicola? How many countries? Where is Yata? In
I was just telling you last night, but today I think that Camilla can answer better.
Please. 30. So they try to bridge this gap, the misconceptions about NATO across the alliance, the states. So I'm very glad to have them here today, I mean, in these last 3 days, because they are the conduit, as even other organizations, between NATO, the military alliance, because NATO is a military alliance, sorry, a political military alliance, my apologies, and the civil society. So, well done, guys. I do appreciate your effort and your endeavor. They are very young disruptors, but very welcome disruptors. So, this could be a part of the solution, not the solution. I've been hinging on such, please take a seat, of such asset, even on another conference from another organization, which is the Atlantic Forum. So, these youth can really make the difference. I mean, support us in this endeavor.
So, if we now can pass to the how, I have the challenging task of actually giving you an idea of what's going to happen next. Well, first of all, I will circulate an email with all the email addresses. They're going to be in blind copy. If you do not want your email address to be spread to this community, just answer me that you don't want. Otherwise, I will just send out another one so everybody can be in touch. And that is the first point. The second point, the outcome of the conference is going to be a report, a document that you will receive in draft copy. Please have a look at it, give us suggestions. And what I would like you to do for me now is to do exactly what they have done. From your perspective, from your experience, from your organization, I'm going to give you some ideas that we came up with. But what is missing in those points that you would like to see in the report? So if I would start with the policy. NATO, as you don't know, does not have a policy on CPP. Is there interest? We don't know if it's generated. We have ammunition to actually foster it, to advocate for it. We do have the directive that is a good instrument. There is an action plan that is going on. Many things that we have heard today are already part of that. So whenever we will be participating, you help me to actually, or help the organization, the COE, to present the SP point. Now it's not only our point, it is your point, also from your organizations. We have heard doctrine. Well, I don't know if we want to have a separate doctrine for CPP, probably not. CPP is a cross-cutting topic. It should be integrated in all the relevant doctrines. Since we are caring about SP, our part should be part of the relevant doctrines as well, and this is one of the tasks. Definitions: cultural property or cultural heritage, cultural property protection, another work stream. I would really like not to use the word goods. Goods gives the idea that you want to sell something. I would stay away from that. Let's say artifacts, pieces of art. Lessons learned cycle. Where can SP, CPP, lessons learned, good practices be collected and brought to the community? Policing of civilians' mindset. We heard that different approach to the combat force, looking at the long term, thinking as a police officer, I'm going to be patrolling here today, tomorrow, in a month, and in 10 years possibly. Do I really want to use this amount of force, or should I actually engage differently? Community policing. The community, there should be an interaction, so I want to know what their needs are, so I can understand how to respond to those needs, also in protection cultural property. Personnel and resources and specialized personnel. We heard that we do not have enough. How do we create more? And this is good for the nations. You can use them in times of crisis for NATO SP, but you can also use them at home every day. Databases. Databases about cultural property. We have this information knowledge management project going on within NATO. One database about experts. You could be all part of that. I was thinking possibly a database about legal resources. Deployed to the nation, they do not have a law about cultural property. Well, these are some articles, this is the idea, why don't you apply them? The work has been done, it has worked in other places. Technology, not only the ID art, but also the ID art. Can we find a way to actually use it within NATO somehow? Personnel in terms of awareness, and I'm thinking not only of SP personnel, but mostly of non-SP personnel, people who are not performing SP, and in their education and training, in their career, I would say from the very basic training, they should get this idea about CPP, which is not only a legal topic. In terms of engagement, we heard networks. You are going to be part of the network if you're willing to do so. We would really like that. Bringing together the military, the police, the nations. Also thinking that by participating in something like this, they are implementing the Hague Convention of '54. Something that you can sell very nice in media. The heritage sector. If you cannot deploy, you could work as a reach-back capability or capacity. The legal network, maybe we don't need to actually have a database about legal instruments, but if we have the experts, they can actually tell us, okay, in this country, this is the kind of legal system they have, which might be different from mine. Use this approach, it's going to work. They will accept that. NGOs, international organizations, all the organizations that are present here. And if you have anybody else that you would recommend, please, put us in touch. If you look at the legal framework, well, I don't know how much we can do about the international, but definitely we can do something in terms of host nation law, and I gave you just a couple of examples. Rules of engagement, developing something specific about stability policing in cultural property protection. I really don't know how much we can do about the mandate, but if we create this awareness also within NATO, also about stability policing, it's definitely going to help us. So it needs to be realistic, obviously. I wrote down evolution of the conflict, something that I connect with hybrid threats, and where I see an important role for stability policing as a proactive tool to enforce the law. And we have seen maybe in helping to create the proper laws. Strategic communication, the overlap between war, crime, terrorism, and also the links between those. Evolution of the force. You cannot innovate and transform if you continue doing the things in the same way. Adopting a policing mindset can be useful for all the forces, also the combat forces. It might cost you more in the beginning, but it's going to allow you to disengage earlier because you get the communities on board. In terms of who are the customers for this awareness, I would say international and host nation actors, NATO non-specialists, NATO specialists, and non-NATO, also partner countries. We had Argentina here today, community of interest, the host nation police forces. Why? Because at the end, we need to find this interoperability. We need to be able to actually practice together before the crisis erupts. So when the crisis arrives, we are going to have less problems. I really like the two inputs about Article 5, which we have not mentioned enough. So that's a great point for me. And I know that by touching that, I'm going to reach some important ears at the top of NATO. And then obviously the perception of the communities. These are all the points that I have. I would be really grateful if you have them, you have some contributions right now or anytime in the next days. The latest when we send out the draft. Obviously, I really look forward to continue the engagement and thank you for your participation till now.
So thank you very much, Stefano. So now I would like to give the floor to the director of the Center of Excellence. But before I do so, I would just like to give you a couple of practicalities. Now, we were supposed to have a coffee break at 12 o'clock, and we were supposed to have then a session with the presentation of the final conclusions, and 1:30 lunch for those who wish to have lunch here. What I would say, maybe it's better that we let's say, get rid of the coffee break, present our final conclusions now, and this will give the opportunity for those who want to leave early to leave, and for those who want to stay over for lunch, you can stay over for lunch. Do we all agree on this? Okay, very good. I got a lot of thumbs up, so it's really, first of all, I was inspiring. Now I got thumbs up. Today is my day. I will remember it for ages. So, do we have, before the director will tell you on what the next steps will be from our side, do we have any other questions or any other comments we would like to make? Please.
I think another point that we might want to wrap into the consideration we've made is how how CPP and in general the redefinition of security fit into the NATO strategic concept. Because Colonello De Magistri just mentioned the NATO alliance is a political military alliance. The idea of what NATO does is a moving target, which is why we have multiple strategic concepts. And those are meant to keep the alliance relevant and keep the alliance as a contribution to international peace and security. As we want that, as we continue the mission of the alliance, I think CPP fits into the evolving nature of the alliance itself. We've gone past bipolar kind of superpower confrontation. Now, technically, we've also gone past post 9/11 engagement. We have to rethink what the alliance does. And I think this is an important issue. And what we don't want to do for NATO in general as an alliance is to always be playing whack-a-mole and kind of a reactive approach to the new threats, right? We see that with cyber, for example, how there isn't yet a real consistent approach to cyber. So this is all part and pieces of the puzzle of a redefinition of what it means to be an alliance, a political military alliance, today, what is the contribution that NATO can give, and how we define the nature of the mission if it's not traditional engagement or not only traditional engagement. And I think this is part of, why is it relevant? Why are we here? What are we talking about? And I think that's an important conceptual point to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, very important point. It's the why, as I was telling you before, as I was saying before. For me, for example, if I have to put myself in NATO's shoes, for me, if it's not clear for me why I'm doing something, this something will not carry a lot of weight. But if strategically there is a clear understanding that this is a new and innovative way to do what we're supposed to do, I think it's going to be very, very effective. So thank you very much for your comment. We have another.
Can I chip in on what you said, David?
Yes.
So, cultural property protection is a cross-cutting topic, is already a cross-cutting topic within NATO. It's part of the human security remit. So, whatever doesn't fall within the traditional military instrument of power is human security, to simplify the subject matter. You mentioned cyber. The military approach cyber threats, bombing the server. We unplug the server, simple like that, we, the police. But what I would like to say that NATO is not underestimating the law enforcement issue. In the 2030 New Era approach of the document, NATO talks, Secretary General Stoltenberg talks about the DMEFIL approach. DMEFIL stands for diplomatic, intelligence, military, economic, financial, information, and last but not least, law enforcement. So the 360-degree approach is a refrain in NATO, and the stability policing dimension was included already in the Warsaw Summit in 2016. So there are criticalities between nations because of some rivalry. Unfortunately, we have to be open on this, because of some misconception, as Simonetta said, because we have been advocating, but maybe not enough across the alliance about the role of stability policing. And because of lack of specific resources, we cannot ask all the so-called gendarmerie type forces to do the business. This is why we go back, as the representative from the CIMIC unit in the Netherlands underline, we have to open, and we are open to other contributions, because stability policing is a function which can be delivered by a very open, a very large set of forces. So not only the gendarmes, which are the first logical choice according to the doctrine. So the gendarmerie type forces, the carabinieri are the first logical choice, but we cannot do the job alone. So NATO is not forgetting this piece, but being a political military alliance is to get convinced about the fact that they have not to put it only on papers, but they have to put it in practice. Thank you.
If I may, actually an interesting point. I always thought that since 2016, NATO actually ceased to be a political and military alliance, and they also started to do law enforcement. It's not something that is put on the big board, but the moment that the Allied Joint Publication for Stability Policing was promulgated, and the NATO nations said, yes, this is something that maybe is not our main task, but the situation may arise where nobody else can come in, and they will task us, we will need to be prepared. And since then, this discourse of stability policing is moving on. So that could be one of the directions where we are looking at security from a different perspective. And that means that we are also bringing on board those partners that are less, let's say, interested in pushing this stability policing. Because there is a place for everyone. The fact that you don't want to contribute shouldn't prevent others to actually conduct that. That is the strength of the alliance, of having this huge organization with very diversified capabilities. If one country doesn't have aircraft carriers, it's not going to tell the other, hey, don't use yours. Hey, thank you that you have them, because I can concentrate on something that I do better. It's, again, the idea of this smart defense.
Hello again, my name is Tess Davis and I'm an attorney and executive director of the Antiquities Coalition, a group that focuses on combating the illicit trade. So my point will focus on that. But to reinforce the comments from earlier that have taken place throughout this morning, last night I checked the most recent statistics on the art market, and the NATO alliance makes up about 80% of the visible art market. And yet, if you look at the Metropolitan Police or our American FBI or Homeland Security investigations or the French or Belgium art squads, our police don't have eyes on the ground where the problem stops. We just see the last leg of these transnational crimes, whether it's trafficking, whether it's money laundering, whether it's sanction evasion. We're seeing the end of it. NATO, through stability policing, would be uniquely positioned to see both, to take the bridge from both angles, from both ends, which I think is a really unique position amongst the organizations in the world, because again, covering 80% of the art market, it can have a huge impact that no other group is really positioned to do at this point. So just wanted to build on that with that statistic, having checked it, because it's, no one else is filling this gap. It's desperately needed, and the unique circumstances of being on the ground and in the market can contribute massively to fighting these problems.
Thank you very much. Only one thing, so perfectly see your point. Only one thing, let's not forget that NATO has a specific mandate, and we are talking now stability policing when we're talking about NATO missions. So when we say that the art market, 80% of the NATO countries make up of the art market, but maybe only a slice of this 80% comes from a NATO theater of operations. So there are also other organizations, I'm looking at Interpol, I'm looking at Europol, that can share information, let's say, from the normal Department of Homeland Security or FBI or Carabinieri, etc., because the risk is that scope creep of NATO. So NATO has a defined role, that has defined tasks, missions and responsibilities. We must always remember that the primary role of NATO is not to be a police organization. Primary role of NATO is it's a political/military organization. But of course, and I was mentioning it yesterday, I found myself in this situation with Kosovo when I was working at Europol. When you have an investigation and you have identified criminal in a European country that come from there, and you need to have contact with the source country, because otherwise, you keep stopping the last element of the chain, but you have to cut it upstream. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. Who are you going to talk to? Because there's nothing there. Not today, but when I was working on it, there's nothing there. So at the time, we were talking with ULEX. It was the only counterpart we had. It was ULEX Kosovo, and we were talking to ULEX Kosovo, and they, in the field, they were our counterpart to go and approach the reliable counterparts in the field. So, by analogy, I can imagine that if there is a theater of a NATO operation, and the stability policing asset is deployed, which have investigation capability, if I'm looking for a counterpart in Kabul, and there's nothing in Kabul, who will I talk to? Unless, the last hope is that somebody from, stability policing can act as my counterpart. Otherwise, I'm going to waste my time. So, thank you very much for your point. Any other points? Please.
Paolo Fregadori from the European Union Advisory Mission in Iraq. I just have a comment on David's point that CPP is clearly a difficult, tricky business, whereby strengths can turn into weaknesses, opportunities can turn into challenges, and so on and so forth. So it's a difficult undertaking that can fire back. So I would suggest that maybe you want to refer in your report, in your documents, to the principle of do not harm. So, spelling out explicitly that the NATO CPP will be guided by the principle of do not harm, whereby its action will be fully conflict sensitive and will not are not meant to reinforce negative dynamics. So that's a way. That's a concise way to say we want harm. That's our first thing. We do it there with good intentions, trying to avoid in any way to reinforce negative dynamics. That's a comment on that.
Thank you very much. Indeed, very relevant point. Thank you very much.
If I may, I just checked and I forgot to mention one point about training. So the COE is developing an online course, an awareness course about stability policing in cultural property protection in NATO. These awareness courses, and I'm saying also to the people who are following us on streaming, and we will propagate also through social media, most of these courses are open to anyone. So unfortunately, my colleague from the FBI could not be here. We are in touch even with the prosecutor from New York. I have connections to Australia, and we met in different ways, the way we met with you, and just giving this information. There is other kind of actors you have never heard of, but they could be the one resource that could be helpful to what you're doing in that moment.
Okay, do we have any other points? Otherwise, what I would like to do now, I would like to give the floor to Colonel De Magistris, who will tell you what the next steps are with regards to this particular topic. And I also have great news for you. I took the initiative of anticipating the lunch break so that when we finish at 12 o'clock, lunch will be ready for those who wish to have lunch here. Because I think maybe some of you want to go for a walk in Vicenza, or some of you have a plane to catch. So you don't have to wait until 1:30. But this was very, very practical advice. So let's move to more important things. Colonel, the floor is yours.
Cheers, David. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm really impressed, first and foremost, by the professionalism of you all and the contribution. I spoke to all the moderators, and I got a gist of what I missed yesterday. But I mean, maybe I would have been a disruptor if I were with you yesterday. So better that I was only today. I mean, I will praise my colleagues afterwards for what they have done. But let me wrap up. It's really, it was a golden opportunity. We forgot to mention it on Tuesday, but we really seized this opportunity. So, first and foremost, what do we want to do? The network which I mentioned yesterday, which came, whilst I was talking to Pete, I was flabbergasted on the Damascus road. I was stricken by a flash. The informal network. So whoever wants to join the network is more than welcome. It's not mandatory, will be an informal, we'll create maybe a sort of terms of reference, but really is nothing binding, but it's something which will help us to advocate for cultural property protection and for the role of stability policing in cultural property protection. I know that the next step could be even having a sort of annual conference, but I'm thinking aloud, and we have already a volunteer who is Wolfgang in a beautiful place, so we are already booking the flights, although we don't have the date yet, but open reservation. So let's think about it. We'll distribute the concept note and the terms of reference, and let's see what comes out from our minds. The handbook, it is a great idea, and this is something which we have to take on our shoulder at the center, because stability policing in cultural property protection handbook is to be written by us. It's not to be a book, it's to be something very agile, easy to be read, easy to be read before a deployment, easy to be understood by those who are not practitioners. Otherwise, they will think that just this is an academic discussion. For this, for sure, we'll ask for your contribution. Then, as Stefano rightly said, policy, doctrine. In the letter to Ally Command Transformation, which is my counterpart and as director of the center, which is my customer, and by the way, which is the sponsor, albeit without any financial commitment, Alessandro, is the sponsor of the event. I have to report only to ACT. We were suggested to disseminate the report to all the main NATO stakeholders. However, in my letter to ACT, I will ask/demand, or brackets, into brackets, to disseminate the report to the relevant stakeholder, and I will list the stakeholder. Nothing forbids all the colleagues from other NATO entities to provide an initial insight of the outcomes of this conference, but it's not blessed by the chairmanship but I mean your insight will be more than welcome, because they will pave the way for our activities. Doctrine is not only a stability policing matter, is to be a cross-cutting topic, as I mentioned, which it is nestled within human security in NATO, so along with the children armed conflict, trafficking human beings, along with protection of civilians, whatever, I mean, forgetting now, but I mean, human security, as I mentioned, is, to simplify, it is everything but the traditional military instrument of power. I will say, just to steal another quote from Alessandro Di Stefano, cultural property protection is to be everywhere, from artillery to intelligence imagery, and even in the DFAC, dining facility menu, maybe. So everybody is reminded to protect, to keep in mind cultural property. Because we said that, but we must reiterate, this fosters even the legitimacy of the NATO action. And do not harm principle, Paolo, very well said. NATO is not to be perceived as an invader, as an aggressor. It's to be perceived more as a savior everywhere deploys. Database. So we have to, definitions. Yes, we will work on the definitions. And we will ask for your support, because then we have to move across the NATO Standardization Office channels, which are very, very strict. So it's something which we have to take on our shoulders, but since we are going to establish the network, your comments, your contribution will be more than welcome. Legal framework we mentioned, I'm a little bit concerned, but at the international level, I have even a connection with the United Nations Police Division, and I can see whether we can start something, but I will be having a meeting with the police advisor of the United Nations the 14th of December in New York. So I will see whether we can generate some interest, appetite in reviewing the 2017 Security Council resolution on cultural property protection. I don't know. The database, we need to see, maybe Mariana Tonutti can help us on this. We need to see at what stage we are in NATO. There is an ongoing initiative which we partially contributed in the past with Stefano, aimed at creating a database, so we are not reinventing the wheel. What else? That's it. So these are the key points and action points for us, which will be highlighted to ACT. Am I missing anything?
No. Only thing that we discussed today, I think, with Mariana, is that there are several, let's say, there are several different actors within NATO that can do this. So ACT has its portfolio. We will ask the FOGO champion, our FOGO champion. FOGO champion, for those who don't know, is a flag officer, general officer, who's supposed to raise the flag of stability policing within the wider remit of the alliance. So we will ask to involve the relevant departments of NATO, because, and I think the best example is exercises, no? For example, ACT deals with training. But training is one part, but then you have exercises, and for military, in the military world, exercises are extremely important. thankfully, because we don't have a war, but we need to be prepared for a war, so thankfully our military are working on exercises all the time, and unless you put some of these topics in the exercises, you can only prepare, train, fight as you train. You cannot fight for something you haven't prepared for, but then exercises are not run by ACT, but they're run by ACO, so Allied Commands Operations. So we will try to involve all the relevant stakeholders, also on a policy level. This is all from my side on this.
Good point, sir. So if we are over, and we have still 50 minutes, I don't want to fill the time just for the sake of talking, ma now is the time to say grazie dal profondo del cuore, my heartfelt thanks to my colleagues, to those who contribute to organize this event. Again, sometimes it's far easier to organize a police crackdown, isn't it? So moving parts, so many problems, communication problems, people jumping in. We said, no, the first day was a little bit heavy, but we had the queue. At one stage in the last week, we had people waking up asking to be involved. So we were moved by this interest, but then we said, how can we fit all these people in the agenda? So I do like, and I did appreciate your approach, your understanding when we had even some too long presentations. So nobody fell asleep, nobody at least was snoring. So I'm short-sighted, maybe somebody was capable to sleep with open eyes. So, but to do it, I mean, we work in this environment, we know what it means. To do this, I mean, there is a preparation, a long-term preparation. And so, I will not start with Stefano, because Stefano is the last one. So, first and foremost, I need to say grazie to David, who is always ready to step in whenever there is a need. Even because then I was affected by COVID, I was in the middle of nowhere, with due respect to the UK, but I was in the middle of nowhere, in the countryside. In front of a NATO compound. The guys, Kadir, my deputy, was ready, always ready to say, yes, I'm here, no worries, I can do it, I can cover for you. So, but I need to say thank you to David, because he's behind an awful lot of stuff, and he's always ready to support me with a blink of an eye. So, we thank you so much.
But after coffee.
Yeah.
Not before coffee.
Yeah, but please remember, when you deal with David, be sure that he has taken at least the second coffee. Before the second coffee is a little bit difficult, and it's big, so it's not nice too. So,
thank you.
That said, David, I want to present to you something which is, I cannot say that is a piece of art. Grazie, David. Sì, Marco. Somebody else that I have to thank, but I will thank you later. So we created the new coat of arms of the center, which is even bestowed to all those, all the members of the center who leave. So when they leave, they receive the new coat of arms. The one which I presented is a Class A token, so we present to the highest authority. I present it to the ambassador Pontecorvo. So we have a SOP, so we have to follow the SOP, so we cannot give the coat of arms to everybody. So we present it to him, and then the former coat of arms, which was a little bit different, was retired, if I may. But still, we have some pieces which are unique. And so I took this opportunity to present you this small token. Again, it's completely different, but there are only few left. So, David, I cannot read it, unfortunately. I mean, for your understanding, it's...
I can also not read it,
yeah,
so it's not a problem.
So trust me, it's for your understanding.
Let's hope it's for me, not for somebody else.
You are smiling, eh?
Thank you very much.
Okay, and now...
I will reuse the box for
yes,
the next...
no, even you have to give me back. So, Stefano, you have to wait, because Marco, Olga, where are you? Olga, Marco, they are in my front office again. In these 3 weeks, because I was even somewhere else in Lithuania, around the world, the previous week before getting the COVID. They bear with me. I was, the director is always the boss, so, it's difficult to bear with the boss. So, anyway, grazie to you as well. Kadir, we have to thank even the the administration logistics section, Bob, who is your chaperone, the one who waited for you at the airport. Again, nothing is a given in this kind of environment, trust me. Organizing even trips is a little bit sometimes difficult to make everybody, to put everybody on the same bus. Again, it's far easier to arrest people. So there is Aldo, the ILS section chief, Massimo, Antonio. We mentioned the thing on those who were asking the money, but it piled up on their work. And then we had an awful IT breakdown. So you have seen our IT magician, Ivan, dealing here with the problems. But unfortunately, the problem which we had at the center a couple of weeks ago caused the meltdown of the server. Simple like that. So imagine we lost data, we lost an awful lot of problems, speeches, drafts, so on and so forth, and all the fluid, all the data for our BadFin office. So it was really another problem which piled up with the other problems. That said, last but not least, no Kadir, we have to mention Stefano, because first and foremost, he managed to survive the close relationship with me. So it should be, and then I have the same token, which is a memorabilia, because it's one of the last. So it's your name, I don't know, trust me. And it's not just an OPR, because it's not, so it has not only organized the event, but it knows the matter very well. I mean, better than everybody else, at least in the center. So, thank you so kudos. Like the Romans, the legions. Okay, so without further ado, Dave, floor is yours. Kadir.
Okay. Would you like to take the floor?
Especially, I think after the COVID times, this is my first activity in center also. I came here for 1 year and I will leave at the end of January next year. It was also another experience for me about culture protection, property protection. I deal with many issues in my life, especially about the trafficking of it. But with this kind of activity, which involves everybody from world, many institutions, really give me another experience to understand everything. Thank you for your contribution to our conference. It's really outstanding. Thank you very much.
One last thing, which is probably the last important thing I'll say today. We have, for those who have to use the shuttle bus to go back to the Kinoto compound, we have anticipated the shuttle bus, because we have anticipated lunch, of course, except I forgot the time. Yes, so it's at 1:30. It was supposed to be at 3 o'clock, it's now at 1:30. So, and I think this is the last important thing I'll say today. So from my side, my personal side, thank you very much. It was very informative and very interesting for me, because I had no clue about this crime area from this point of view. So very interesting for me. And I hope I'll be able to see you again. This is a very small world, so we will probably meet again in some of these meetings, hopefully maybe in this new informal working group which is in the process of being created. And I can say when this informal group will become a formal group and will become really, really famous, I can say I was there when the idea was launched in front of a bottle of wine, you know, and I will use this to say be careful how much you drink during an event. You can have unwanted consequences. So thank you very much.